The UK has left the European Union. If you voted Brexit, why? How will it benefit you personally? Serious answers only. I voted Leave during the referendum, and whilst I stand by my reasons for this initial vote, I came to change my view over the course of the absolute nightmare that has been Brexit. When I voted, it was primarily because of the federalisation of the EU. I am not opposed to this in principle, but I have never been very convinced by how the European government is structured. In particular, I was concerned that the European Parliament votes on legislation and cannot propose new legislation. They can only debate and amend legislation put forth to them by the European Commission. I believed, and still believe, that there is a fundamental democratic deficit in the European Union and that full integration into a supranational quasi-federation would not be desirable whilst such a deficit exists. I feel that the EU needs to either fully federalise or draw back into a looser confederation. The half-and-half state it currently in does not feel robust or stable enough to be properly efficacious. I was very torn when it came time to vote. I have never considered myself European, and as stated above, I had a lot of reservations about the EU, but I also recognized the advantages of membership. At the time I believed that federalization was inevitable if the EU was to survive, and so long as major reforms were not put in place, reforms I had despaired of ever occurring, then I felt the UK would be drawn into what would in essence be a federal oligarchy. When I voted, I made a number of erroneous assumptions about how the Brexit process would unfold, which tipped my hand in favour of Leave and which did not come to pass. 1. The Conservative Party is self-serving and cruel, but they're not insane. 2. Brexit is by nature a political poison chalice because of the strong opinions on both sides. Europe has always been a divisive issue and the government must understand this. 3. Because of 2, a bipartisan commission or committee would be established to negotiate Brexit. This would allow the Tories to have their cake and eat it. Setbacks could be blamed on Labour EU and their own involvement downplayed, whilst successes and positive outcomes could be bigged up since it was still their sitting government delivering the will of the electorate. 4. Even if the Tories did decide to go it alone in the negotiations, they wouldn't be utterly incompetent, surely. 5. An election is probably right around the corner because of this mess. Maybe we can get a Labour government, or a Labour-led coalition who I believe would negotiate somewhat more competently than a Conservative one. 6. The Leave vote probably won't win anyway, because it seems like everyone is in favour of the EU, or at least willing to look past its flaws. 7. There will be a deal. We will negotiate a deal. It might not please everyone and it might take quite a lot of negotiating, but the PM isn't going to try to ram one particular version of it down Parliament's throats 3 or 4 times with little to no amendment or negotiation, because that would be stupid. Whilst I stand by my criticisms of the EU, if there had been a second referendum I would have voted Remain. I can finally travel Europe without worrying about my arrest warrant in the UK. I don't care who is right or who is wrong, but this is hands down the best reason I've ever heard for voting Leave. Synopsis. There is huge inequality in the EU. Bulgaria uses horse-drawn carts. Poland has abysmally low wages. This goes on. British companies love this. Instead of having mechanized farms, for instance, where soft fruits are picked by machinery, there is a plethora of cheap labor to do this. The knock-on impact that refusing to innovate and embrace technology has is astounding. Suddenly you don't need engineers, service centers with skilled mechanics. Education becomes devalued. The UK government, not just the Tories, has systematically ignored this. If you talked about this under Blair and Brown, you were labelled a racist. The governments have done nothing to control the abuse of cheap labour until the Brexit vote. So the choice was made for them. Next, Europe is great for lots of things, but the UK doesn't fit in. It never has. The cap is a policy designed to keep French farmers in business and economically conquer Africa by ditching products, like powdered milk, at below-cost prices. The policy never made any sense for the UK, due to being an island, hence the rebate. The EU has flawed with the implementation of a worrying amount of legislation. It took the EU until August 2017, after the Brexit vote, to make it illegal to hire people in places like Poland and Bulgaria, then send them to work in places like France, Germany and the UK at far below minimum wage in those countries. However, it was legal as it was only a short-term temporary relocation. As an expansion here, it's legal for companies to label a product as having specific percentages of ingredients and then tailor it for the local market. Birdseye, and every other manufacturer, has different fish/meat content of prepared food for markets like Germany versus Czechia and Bulgaria. Ever wondered how Dove soap can be so much cheaper across the EU? It's marketed as through its make for France, Germany and the UK and made as though it's for Romania. Then there's the hilariousness of being unable to eject a member. Luxembourg steals about Euro 4k of taxable, my bad, on a mobile, revenue per EU citizen a year. A country of more than 500k people, including foreign workers. They have a huge history of blocking change, with even Juncker himself blocking legislation. The concept of the EU is great. The current implementation is absolutely awful. Leaving is stupid. Staying without serious reform is also equally stupid. And the latter is not an option as the club has grown too big too quickly. To be 100% clear, Farage and co are shit-mongering thundercunts. They have only polarized and divided people on what is an incredibly complex topic. I have no regrets whatsoever. The EU is moving closer and closer to becoming a federation. Other than that, the EU is quite flawed. And the idea that it can be reformed from the inside is quite ludicrous. I don't want to be dragged down by the Romanian or Greek economy. If it was a union between the Nordics, France, Germany, Britain, I don't think anyone would complain. The countries being so similar in economics, culture etc. would make such a union far stronger. Without being dragged down by far worse economies that don't care what we say anyway. The entire argument I made there was about economics. And how I disliked being a constant money pig for the union. However, I didn't mention race. I didn't even mention immigration. Yet half of the comments here are calling me racist for wanting something other than what the union currently is. And you wonder why you keep losing elections. A lot of it comes down to domestic politics being stagnated, and the EU was a scapegoat for other issues. Towns and small cities across the UK are deprived of industry, jobs, and evolution onto the modern stage. Aside from the facts above, a majority of people are sad with the status quo. Thirdly, the notion of restrictions. The EU places high legal/economical restrictions on trade. Goods have to be of specific quality, ergo making less money. Additionally, sovereignty of Parliament is eroded with the EU institutions superseding binding authority. There are a variety of reasons. I think ultimately it's the scapegoat argument. Myself and many people alike are trying to remain optimistic about future prospects. Finally, we have a majority government that can pass legislation and actually get stuff done. So here's to the UK's sovereignty. Hope we don't mess it up, and more so retain friendship with our EU friends. Because we joined it under the guise of it being a trading bloc, and that's categorically not what it is now. Very simply, it is apparent that the EU wants to be much more than a trading bloc, and that isn't what we voted to join. I was never asked if I wanted to be irrevocably bound by laws set by an unelected commission. I never voted for what the EU has become. Why should I, a British citizen, have what I can say online dictated by European MEPs or a group of unelected bureaucrats? Why shouldn't those laws be under the control of the people in the host country? Why can't we just cooperate to our mutual benefit? Why do we need to integrate our political and legal infrastructure? Why does the EU, a collaboration of nations, require its own anthem, its own flag, its own army? We want to trade with the people of Europe and we want to cooperate with them in a friendly, mutually beneficial capacity. We do not seek to be ruled by them, nor do we seek to rule them, and we certainly don't want the many nations of Europe to be controlled by a group of unelected, unaccountable commissioners who have sole authority to propose and repeal legislation. I'll give an example pertaining to Articles 11 and 13. These articles passed with no amendments due to, ostensibly, a few MEPs pressing the wrong button during the voting process. Regardless of how the vote should have turned out, if all intentions were corrected, once passed, control of the situation transfers to the Commission. The Commission now has the power to irrevocably bind every nation and every citizen in Europe to the legislation in the form that it was passed. Want to correct the mistake? Want to repeal the legislation? Too bad. You have no democratic mechanism through which to do that beyond begging the Commission for compliance. A democracy should always have the ability to change its mind as well as hold its representatives accountable, and neither mechanism exists within the European Union. Oh, and the attempt to sue countries into submission for refusing migrant quotas was an unforgivable overstepping of boundaries, regardless if it was later dropped. If you like the content, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to hit the like button.